Hi parents, welcome to our weekly newsletter, or I feel like is more coffee chat with Mrs. Arms, fourth grade teacher at Nixon Elementary. This week I really wanted to focus on going back over some of the things from back to school night for two reasons. One, some of you were unable to attend, and I completely understand that. Secondly, our first session got started way late just for traffic jamming in the hallway, and we didn't get to cover a lot of topics. So I wanted to take this time to kind of go back over a few things so that parents kind of get the information that they are wanting. So we started by just kind of getting to know each other, thinking back what it was like for us in fourth grade, thinking about places we've been. I introduced myself and my family. We got to talk a little bit about how family is highly valued and that all of the decisions, routines, policies, rules are all based on this idea of valuing family and valuing your children. And again, that is something that I think about when making decisions for our classroom. The next thing we talked about was that we recognize, and I recognize, that not all of us had the best math experiences growing up, but that we want to have the best experiences for our children, and that we focus a lot in Room 10 about creating what's called a growth mindset. A growth mindset is simply more like the opposite of having a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset is when you believe things are kind of black and white. You're either good at something or you're bad. You're smart or you're not. A growth mindset is more about effort and work and practice and growing and changing. Up until recently, they used to use IQ tests to measure intelligence. But what the work of Carol Dweck has found is that the brain can actually change and grow. It takes a lot of work and effort, but they have found that with some work over time, that students can actually have synapses in their brain and make neurological connections where the brain actually grows in size, in mass over time. So we use that information with our students to know that there might be some things that they can't do yet, but that doesn't mean that they won't get them. So in fourth grade, we really focus on maybe having things we can't do yet, but that we work hard, that we put in a lot of effort. Praise is more focused around specific tasks. I try to avoid praise such as just good job or nice try, but to be very specific. So if it's behavioral, it might look like, I really like how your voice is off and your hands are to your side in the hallway so that we can get to one place to another very quickly. Or if students reading, I might say, I really like your focus and effort in your reading and how you're marking places with sticky notes that you want to come back to later. Or in math, I might praise how much work and effort that they're showing in the work versus just getting the right answer. So in math workshop, here's kind of what our day looks like. So every morning we start with some type of fluency building practice. And this does a couple of things. Once we're really working on visualizations and doing things in our head, we're working on building fluency, which means flexibility and precision. And it also builds community in math. We're all sitting together, working on things together, sharing and learning from each other. We're kind of all coming together to work on these things. The next section of math is that there's a mini lesson. So I'm going to just add a box for mini lesson. So a mini lesson is where the teacher demonstrates a skill or a strategy. The students right there on the rug practice it right then, and they get feedback right then. And so depending on how students are doing, I may provide another one. I may present in a different way at that time. This whole, both the fluency and the mini lesson together take about 10 minutes. Our period is a 60-minute math block. So the rest of the time, students are working on what we call workstations and the teacher's working through guided math. So you might have seen guided reading before when your students were younger. And guided math is similar in structure. So guided math is basically just a teacher pulling small groups. So every day the students are working through their workstations. They're recording a lot in their math notebook, and that allows me to have evidence of what they can do or what they can't do yet on their own. We also do exit tickets at the end of the day, which could be a discussion. It could be something written down, and that lets me know what particular students need. So when I'm pulling students, what's different than maybe traditional guided reading is that they're not in set groups. So I pull students based on need of a particular skill. So this week I just pulled 2 kiddos to the rug who needed extra work with place value, recording numbers, and writing them in an expanded form. I sent them off. After we were done, they went back to workstations. We did a quiz yesterday, and several students still need work with writing in expanded form, even though I thought that they had it. So students that need that work, I'll pull them to the rug. They may or may not be the same kiddos that need help with rounding. So the guided math, the teacher time is very flexible. Everything else students are doing in partnerships, and sometimes may do things on their own, especially if it's on the computer. Each week they'll have a technology center, an exemplar word problem center, a game type center, and a practice type center, as well as time with me. So that's kind of how math workshop goes. Literacy, balanced literacy just means that exactly that it's balanced. So we balance the time of basically of modeled literacy, of hearing books, of read aloud, of word study, things that are guided by the teacher. And then it's also balanced with this independent time. So we have independent reading. It's really hard to talk and type at the same time. Independent reading and writing. And during this time, the teacher, me, I'm conferring with students individually, or similar to math, I'm pulling strategy groups. So if, it may be students that need an introduction to character development over time. There may students that have mastered that skill are not going to be pulled for that group. They may need work with theme or developing multiple themes or the idea that characters are complex. So they would be pulled to work on that topic as well as conferring with me one-on-one. The focus in 4th grade for all subjects is this idea of feedback. So this is based off researcher John Hattie and visual learning. You can just Google him and you can see he organizes over 140 characteristics that influence student education. And I always tell when I'm working with other teachers that there's great news about this data and there's bad news about this data. The good news about this data is that the teacher is the #1 influencer of student success in the classroom. The scary news about that data is that teachers are the #1 influence for student success in that classroom. So some of the things might include teacher modeling, teacher discussion, having a safe environment, providing feedback, engaging students in learning. All of those things really move students forward. And so what John Hattie has done is taken all of these things that influence students and given them what's called an effect size. So you'll see it goes from, let me move the screen over so you can see. It goes from -10 all the way to 100. And so the things that we're obviously wanting to focus on are these things over here that are in the zone of desired effect. So it has to have an effect size of 0.4 or greater. You'll notice feedback is at I think it's a 0.72 or 0.74. So that means it's one of those things that has the greatest amount of influence over student learning. And that's student feedback, teacher feedback, but it has to be kind, helpful, and specific. Those are the things. So that's what we focus on. That's why we confer with students so much at Nixon. That's why we do small group instruction so much at Nixon, because that feedback is what takes students' papers from one level of complexity to the next. That's what takes students from reading one type of text to more sophisticated text. That's what takes them from being able to use certain strategies to being more sophisticated strategies in mathematics. That's how they develop scientific thinking and content in science. So we use feedback highly. That's our #1 way of working with students. In science, we'll use a lot of STEM-based learning. And then I'm going to go ahead and actually skip to our last slide. So the last thing we kind of talked about was homework policy, classroom management and discipline, reading, our class schedule. I already talked about growth mindset a little bit. So on my website, through WordPress, it's linked on the Nixon School page, is our policy about homework. And you'll see the very first picture, if I can pull it up, is that we value family time. And that family time should be every single night of the week. And so our policy about homework is that your students are with us all day long. We expect them to work hard and put in full effort when they're here. And so when they're home, that's what we want them to have. I talk more about John Hattie's research again. His research shows that homework has little effect in elementary grades. I do remind you about this important note from the American Board of Pediatrics that talks about for proper brain development and cognitive learning and growth that students need to be reading every day, approximately 10 minutes per grade. So by fourth grade, that's about 40 minutes. Students should be getting through one page of text in 1 to 2 minutes, depending on the size and the font and the complexity. That's how you'll know it's a good fit for them. So that's about 20 pages a night at home. We read in the classroom, but we honestly don't have a 40-minute block. So they're getting about 20 minutes in the classroom. So that would be about an hour a day of reading. There's some research there for you. There's another article on the slides about the importance of reading. I do talk about sometimes they need extra time to finish assignments. And then all of the other ways that you'll know about your student progress. You saw their portfolios last night. Those will come home every marking period. So when their report cards are released in Genesis, I will send home their portfolio for a few days for you to go over some of the more formalized assessments so you can see how they're actually performing in the classroom, that's in that data that's used as evidence for their report card markings. Another site on or another page on my website, I should say, is about classroom management and classroom discipline. So there's kind of two ways to look at it. Some call it classroom discipline. I call it more about building a classroom community. So we talked about these rules the first couple of days in our classroom, and we go over them frequently. And we start every morning with a classroom meeting, meeting each other, talking to each other, and doing an activity to get to know each other, to build our community. And if things aren't working well, we sit down just like you would with your family and problem solve and figure it out. And I know that might sound nice and fluffy, but the truth is that works for 90% of the kiddos. For the kids that need more, they may have a more individualized plan, or maybe we're doing think sheets to think about their behavior. If it impacts their learning or the learnings of others, then you'll be communicated with and we'll figure something out. But for the most part, the focus on building classroom community, not classroom management or classroom discipline. There's some more information here from Katie Wood Ray and from the creators of Capturing Kids' Hearts. If you would like to read more about my philosophy of classroom management and discipline, the schedule was sent home on paper last night, as well as it's linked on our website. If you weren't able to make it, all of the slides were printed and are sent home. There's also a letter from Mrs. Lynch about the fourth grade kind of health and wellness conversation that happens in June, where the boys and girls are split up to talk about just physical development. We did kind of have, we're joking last night about students wearing deodorant. If that's not something you've talked to them about already, I almost beg you to have that conversation and start that habit now. It's hard to get into, but it's really something that is important, really starting at this age and this time when they're having PE, recess, and we're pretty active in the classroom. And so if you haven't started that habit, go ahead and start. Thank you so much for tuning in. Next week, we'll focus more on one of our content areas, and I'll take you on a little deeper dive of that. Thank you again for tuning in. Thank you for coming last night. It was great to see you all. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.